When my father remarried after my mother's death, everyone expected me to smile, shake hands, and welcome his new wife into the family. They called me bitter because I kept my distance. They whispered that I couldn't accept my father moving on. What none of them knew was that my late grandfather had trusted me with a secret worth $40 million, and he made me promise never to reveal it until the right moment. My grandfather wasn't just wealthy. He was brilliant. Before he died, he told me something that changed my life forever. He looked directly into my eyes from his hospital bed and said, "Money doesn't destroy families. Greed does. One day you'll understand why I protected you." At the time, I thought grief was making him speak in riddles. I couldn't have been more wrong. Only 3 days after his funeral, an attorney handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter and a private trust agreement. Everything changed with a single sentence. "No one, not even your father, is allowed to know about this inheritance until you decide they deserve the truth." $40 million. Hidden. Protected. Waiting. Grandfather had spent years quietly transferring his investments into a private trust entirely under my name. No one in the family suspected anything. Not my father. Not my aunt. Not my cousins. No one. He said he had watched the family long enough to know exactly what would happen after he died. He predicted every betrayal before it happened. He warned me not to tell anyone because the moment people learned about the money, they would stop loving me and start calculating my value. At 26 years old, I thought he was being overly cautious. Then my father announced he was getting married. Only 8 months after my mother's funeral. Everyone applauded. Everyone celebrated. Everyone insisted I should be happy. Her name was Victoria. Beautiful. Elegant. Soft-spoken. The kind of woman who always smiled just enough to appear kind without revealing anything real. She claimed she wanted nothing from my father except love. She constantly reminded everyone she had her own successful career. She insisted she didn't care about money. Those were the first lies. The wedding was expensive. Very expensive. Victoria somehow convinced my father to sell my mother's lake house because she believed old memories prevent new happiness. That house had been in our family for nearly 70 years. Grandfather built it himself. Dad sold it within 2 weeks. I watched strangers tear down the flower garden my mother planted. Victoria smiled through every bulldozer. She said it was time to move forward. Then she started replacing everything inside my father's home. Pictures of my mother disappeared. Family heirlooms vanished. Grandfather's antique desk was donated without asking anyone. Every trace of our family history slowly disappeared. It felt less like she had joined the family. It felt like she was erasing it. Still, I remained silent. Because grandfather had taught me something else. When people believe you've lost everything, they reveal who they truly are. Victoria thought I was broke. She believed I rented my small apartment because I couldn't afford better. She laughed when she saw my 10-year-old pickup truck. She told relatives I lacked ambition. She had no idea I owned investment properties through anonymous companies. She didn't know I donated hundreds of thousands of dollars every year to children's hospitals. She didn't know I had enough money to buy the neighborhood she lived in. I wanted people to know me. Not my bank account. Months passed. Then the manipulation began. Victoria slowly isolated my father from everyone. Old friends stopped visiting. Family dinners ended. Phone calls became shorter. Every disagreement somehow became my fault. Dad stopped sounding like himself. He repeated Victoria's opinions word for word. She convinced him I was jealous. She convinced him I hated seeing him happy. Eventually, he believed her. One evening he invited me over. Instead of dinner, it was an intervention. Victoria sat beside him with folded hands. She calmly explained that my negative attitude was damaging their marriage. Dad asked me to apologize. For grieving my mother. For questioning the sale of our family home. For feeling uncomfortable watching strangers erase our memories. I stood there speechless. I realized my father wasn't thinking anymore. Someone else was thinking for him. I walked away. 6 months later my phone rang. Dad needed money. Apparently Victoria's business opportunity required another $500,000 investment. She had already convinced him to cash out retirement accounts. She refinanced their house. Borrowed against insurance policies. Even sold Severa. Classic car's grandfather had restored decades earlier. Everything was disappearing. Dad assumed I couldn't help financially. He only called because he wanted emotional support. I simply told him. I hope you're making careful decisions. Victoria grabbed the phone. She called me selfish. Ungrateful. Pathetic. She laughed that I'd never understand what real success looked like. I quietly wished them good luck. Then I hung up. Another year passed. Then one rainy Thursday evening. Someone knocked on my apartment door. I opened it. Standing there was Victoria. Not smiling. Not confident. Not glamorous. She looked terrified. Behind her stood a sharply dressed attorney carrying 2 leather briefcases. The same woman who once refused to sit in my truck was now standing on my porch asking for help. She immediately demanded we talk privately. She claimed she had discovered something my father never knew. Someone had uncovered grandfather's trust. She wanted access. She insisted the inheritance belonged to the family. Her lawyer explained that challenging the trust would be easier if I cooperated voluntarily. Victoria believed I would panic. Instead, I invited them inside. I offered coffee. I listened patiently as they explained why I should surrender tens of millions of dollars because family shares everything. Then I quietly asked one question. When exactly did my grandfather promise any of this to you? Silence. She admitted she'd never even met him before his illness. I opened my safe. Removed grandfather's handwritten letter. Placed it on the table. The attorney read every page. His expression slowly changed. Then he looked at Victoria. This trust is practically impossible to challenge. She refused to believe him. She screamed. She accused me of manipulating an elderly man. She demanded my father deserved half. The attorney interrupted again. Then he revealed something Victoria didn't expect. He had already investigated. Grandfather anticipated legal attacks years before his death. Every document had been independently verified by multiple witnesses, physicians, financial experts, and video recordings explaining exactly why he excluded everyone else. There was nothing to contest. Nothing. Victoria exploded with anger. She stormed out. The attorney quietly apologized for wasting my evening before following her. 3 weeks later. Dad called. His voice sounded broken. Victoria had disappeared. So had millions of dollars. Several bank accounts were empty. Luxury jewelry missing. Investment funds liquidated. Even his signature had allegedly been forged on multiple financial documents. Federal investigators became involved. Everything grandfather predicted was happening exactly as he said. Dad cried harder than I'd ever heard. Not because of the MO. Nay. Because he finally understood what he'd sacrificed. His marriage. His parents' legacy. His relationship with his only child. All for someone who saw him as an opportunity. Months later he asked to meet me. Not to discuss money. Not to ask for forgiveness. Just to talk. For hours we shared stories about Mom. About grandfather. About fishing trips. About birthdays. About life before greed entered our home. Near sunset he quietly admitted. I stopped listening to the people who loved me and started believing the person who benefited most from controlling me. I nodded. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Eventually I handed him another envelope. Inside was the deed to a beautiful lakeside home. Not my mother's old house. That one was gone forever. But this home overlooked the same lake. I had secretly purchased it months earlier. Not because he deserved another fortune. Because despite everything, he was still my father. He burst into tears. For the first time in years, they weren't tears of regret. They were tears of gratitude. Grandfather had been right all along. $40 million wasn't the greatest inheritance he left me. Wisdom was. The money simply exposed everyone's true character. Victoria lost everything she tried to steal. The lawsuits followed her for years. My father spent the rest of his life rebuilding trust instead of chasing wealth. And I finally understood why my grandfather protected the inheritance with silence. Sometimes karma doesn't arrive through revenge. Sometimes karma simply lets people destroy themselves while the truth waits patiently for its moment.